Hi everyone, I'm sorry that you have to sit through one more. My name is Chase and my project was called Gathering Community Perspectives on Power Cost Equalization, but included PCE is also just rural energy systems and renewable energy in rural communities. Yeah, we don't need to talk about that. So to complete my project, I utilized the community engaged research framework to integrate community perspectives into conversations about PCE and rural energy at the statewide level. So my project kind of started from nothing. I didn't really have an idea of what I would be doing when I came to ACEP. So it was really cool to work with Gwen and Magnus to kind of just get a read of what was happening in the PCE world and where I could fit into it. So one of the conversations that Gwen identified from being at the legislature and being part of these high-level conversations is PCE updated to best serve modern rural community systems. And so I kind of started by researching PCE and just energy subsidies in general in other Arctic areas of the world. And through that, I kind of identified that there's a lack of academic literature on PCE. Since it's only an Alaska program and it's a subsidy that only exists here, there's not really many researchers outside of the state that are interested in doing specific research on PCE. So I just noticed that overall there was a gap in documenting a lot of these conversations that Gwen had identified from being in person with energy stakeholders in Alaska. On top of that, after watching videos of like committee meetings at the legislature and things like that, I noticed that there's a lot of voices that are missing from the informal conversations that are happening. And one of the voices I chose to try to start integrating into conversations were community perspectives from communities that actually receive PCE funding onto their residential kilowatt hour use. So like I said, my goal was to start to integrate these community member perspectives on PCE and rural energy systems to better inform the state level conversations so that they can get the perspectives of people who are actually directly impacted by this program. I also really wanted to make sure to integrate the community engaged research framework, that's the acronym for it, up there, because that's something that's really important to me. And I think that throughout my environmental studies background, integrating community perspectives into energy transitions and things like that is really crucial. So the other side of my project and the other community I wanted to integrate besides just PCE community members was high-level stakeholder perceptions of PCE. So I also conducted interviews with stakeholders around the state that I'll talk a little bit more about, but that was another goal of mine. So this is kind of repetitive at this point, but ultimately my goal is to start to fill the gap in formal research on PCE through not only just getting stuff written down, because there's not a lot that's formally written down and accessible on Google Scholar and things like that. And also try to start to fill in some of the community impacts and on-the-ground perceptions that people have. So like I said, I use a community engaged research framework, and essentially what that framework does is it guides what methods you choose to use. So basically it views the communities you work with as equal partners, and there's a whole range of the level of integration and collaboration researchers can have with community members. But essentially what it means is you say, okay, I want to build a relationship with the community. You don't have something you're specifically, a hypothesis you're looking to test, but rather you're like, okay, what's the way that this would work best for the community based off what they tell me, and what outcomes do they give me? So you're not going in with like a preconceived hypothesis, but instead you're kind of saying, what can I gather from them and how can we work together to make a project that serves both of us? So after working with some of the community members in Minto, which I'll talk a little bit more about why Minto in a second, we chose that surveys, like written surveys, would be the best way to collect data from community members, because we thought that by doing semi-structured interviews to collect data, we'd be putting like community members who don't really think about energy a lot on their day-to-day lives, like on the spot to sort of come up with these really big answers. But I did use semi-structured interviews for my high-level stakeholder interviews who have professional roles in energy and might think about PCE a lot more often. So here's a photo of me during the survey session at Minto. We're in the Lakeview Lodge. And so to kind of fill in why Minto, I got the opportunity to go with the drone strand of the T3 group in June and kind of just tag along and look at their community engaged project that they did with some drone mapping. And I was really inspired by that work. And we have a lot of different partnerships that are starting to come to fruition in Minto. And I was able to lean into those existing trusting relationships because it would take 10 weeks in of itself to start building that relationship from the ground up with a community. So I was really lucky that ACEP and T3 had these resources that I could kind of plug in on. And then from there, the first time I was in Minto, I just honestly pulled people aside, tried to talk to them, even though they weren't there to talk to me, they were there to learn about the drone stuff. But yeah, I just started reaching out to people, and then I got to meet some of the elders in the community who are really great liaisons between T3, ACEP, and technology and the Minto community. So through these connections, I kept emailing people. I was really persistent. And there was about a month of time where I had no idea if I would actually get to go back and actually do the survey process. But ultimately, we were able to work with the tribal council to get a date set for me to come out. And I brought Dane and Gabe Lau with me, which they were so helpful in getting, like, it's not just a random intern showing up. So yeah, that was a really cool process. And overall, we got 27 surveys, and in a town of about 150 people, that's a pretty awesome turnout. Oh, and also, I guess one last thing is to promote community engagement. We worked with the elders and some other community members via just a group chat to think about like what would make people want to show up. So we had some baked goods, and we tried to make it a really open and collaborative environment where people could kind of stop by, drop in and out. And as you can see, people are hanging out and chatting, which was really awesome. And then also we had a drawing to win tickets to the Naval Valley State Fair here in Fairbanks, which definitely was a huge incentive for people. So moving forward, I really want to make sure that we see this community collaboration all the way through and deliver results to Minto. So right now I'm in the process of trying to reconnect back with Eliza, one of the elders, and some of the tribal council members to see what next steps look like. And then as far as my high-level stakeholder interviews that I did while I was kind of waiting for the Minto aspect to come to fruition, I have some qualitative data from those interviews that I need to quantify. And I'm going to do that using this software called In Vivo that essentially allows you to code or categorize general themes in interview statements to actually get numbers on how many times those themes come up. And I'm also going to be working on this project for my senior thesis coming this fall, so I'll get to like stay on part-time and really make some deliverables for ACEP that go along with my thesis too, which I'm really excited about. And what I think I want to do is overall develop a proposal for increased collaboration between energy entities, so like the state, ABEC, and all these other like TCC, other energy entities, and local communities. Because I think examining the I just wrote this yesterday. This is very new. Like looking at how communication can impact public perception. Because ultimately this didn't become about PCE in the end, although we were asking questions about PCE and renewable energy. It became about how, like, where are people at in terms of their awareness and what are the impediments to getting better energy literacy in rural Alaska, and where are people getting their news from now. So kind of capitalizing off these current sources of news to just increase personal stake within communities and energy systems. Some other things that I think would be really cool to do but are not in the scope of my thesis would be comparing the perceptions we identified within the surveys to quantitative data. So for example, we saw that people say that they're paying about $250 a month for energy or electricity, but according to ABEC's calculation, it should only be $90 a month. So I just want to see like where that discrepancy comes from. I think that would be a really interesting question. And then also comparing energy professionals' perceptions of PCE in rural energy systems to community members' perceptions, and that could be done once I get some of the like high-level stakeholder interviews quantified. So to conclude, some successes was, like I said, really high turnout for all community engagement, especially with Minto surveys. we overall identified patterns in community perspectives and perceptions towards PCE and rural energy in Minto, and I made a really robust analysis of all that data within the last 2 weeks. So it all happened really fast at the end of my internship, but I got it all done. I also built the project from the ground up. Like I kind of had to identify like what skills do I have, what's feasible in the scope, because at first the questions we were asking when we were like looking at these conversations is like, how can we make PCE better? And then I realized that's a question that's been asked ever since 1985 when it began. So not something I'm going to answer right now. And then also, I think I was one of the first ones to formally integrate community engaged research methods into ACEP's research. And this kind of is an entire lens in which to conduct research that might have been integrated, and I think has been integrated through these community partnerships, but not intentionally in terms of like from a research theory perspective. So some takeaways, community engagement research in practice is a lot different than what I've learned throughout my social science courses at school. Learning things like social norms and like even eye contact is like so different in different cultures and like rural communities I've never been in before. So I had to kind of be gracious with myself as I like just learned new things and learned new cultural perspectives. And that like, I just grew a lot from that experience. And then also just prioritizing strong community relationships. Like I said, I couldn't have done this without existing relationships with T3. You can't just go somewhere and expect the community to collaborate with you. So how do you build these relationships that are built on trust? And then patience and persistence with stakeholders. A lot of my days, especially when I was working on high-level stakeholder interview research, was spent just cold calling people. It was a lot, and I would sometimes get calls back, sometimes I wouldn't. It really helped if I threw Gwen's name out there. So just having patience and just reaching out again and again. More often than not, people will ultimately start to take you seriously. My favorite part was planning the community event in Minto and really collaborating with Eliza and Cameron and other people in Minto to make that happen and make an event that people actually wanted to go to. I thought it was a really cool challenge. And then also just getting to connect with different stakeholders in Alaska. I love getting to collaborate with different people, and I don't really like the sitting on my computer alone part of work. So I liked that. My least favorite part was trying to wrap my head entirely around the economics of PCE. Like at first I started my project within the first 3 weeks trying to actually write that reform to PCE, and I realized that was almost like it was just not possible for me. So trying to think on that large scale was really frustrating for me. Also, I really want to do some of the more next steps with research, but limited capacity. And then also, like I mentioned, sitting with the uncertainty for about half of my internship of like whether this would come to fruition or not. I really just had to take it one day at a time, and I'm really happy with how our hard work paid off. So, thank you.
Kudos.
Thanks, Dane.
Chase did a phenomenal job of walking through a lot of uncertainty. Yeah, that's very true. And she also managed to continue to build the sort of the community relationship and maintain that trust. And she's making sure that she's been helping me remember we have IOUs back to the community system.
I'll just jump on the bandwagon there with Dane. Thank you for joining with the students and that learning process and being a big listener and learner throughout that entire process. I think the dual combo of a group of students showing up to do something and then the following through with actual curious research on how can we make things better was phenomenal. And my students are resonating with the energy you brought to them.
Thank you. Yeah.
I was curious about the social aspect about it because when I think of doing research in and asking people questions, it would be like a formal process. But you had a social kind of informal process, and I wonder what that brought to the information that you got. Like, did you get more information doing it that way? Did you get a different flavor of information that you would have gotten?
Yeah, I don't think people would have participated if we made it super formal at all. I think, yeah, I think it would have come off really intimidating and really just like a bunch of outsiders sitting at this table, like waiting to interview you. And yeah, I think having the open concept, like pop in, pop out, we were just tabling. We had like stickers and stuff, made it a lot more comfortable for people. Yeah, we were also in a public space, so people were going to like submit their timesheets and stuff. So it was really easy for them to just like stop by for 10 minutes or however long. And then some people like ended up sitting there the whole time, just like watching, which is really cool. But I think if we were like, stop whatever you're doing, sit down with us and do this right now, it would have, like, I would not say yes to that. So you kind of just have to think about like, someone said this yesterday, but like think about the audience you're presenting to. I thought that was like a really interesting way to frame it. And I also got a lot of feedback from the elders. As someone who's only been to Mentor once and didn't really interact with the general population, like that was really helpful. Yeah, just kind of meeting people where they're at. And I think if what I wouldn't do is have this informal tabling session, but not have a survey. Like you can't just gather little comments as data, because I did have like a consent form on the survey. I walked people through it. They had the option to answer or not to answer questions. Some of them, like I wrote it down and they just spoke to me and told me their ideas. So I think by having like things that like tangible questions, people weren't just like spilling all their opinions about energy. They were answering things that I offered up to them. And I think that made it more approachable as well. And then the last thing I'll say is way more multiple choice than long answer questions. Like no one wants to take, if they're just popping in, no one's gonna write out a full paragraph of what they think. So yeah, that's something I learned from like the survey formulating process. Thank you.